Last week, we looked at the Arn-Thompson-Utter classification index for folklore, basically an index system made by about 3 generations of folklore scholars who look at tales and classify them by their motifs. Motifs are kind of like Legos. They're the building blocks of stories, and you can arrange them in one order to get one story and get a lot of the same blocks, arrange them in a different order, and get a totally different story. So, for example, the motif of a magical helper could be arranged in a story to be part of a Cinderella. It could be arranged in a story to be part of a Puss in Boots. So, and knowing how they're arranged, what sort of order, what combinations, that's what that index is about. So, for the ATU 312, the tales we're looking at this week, you're going to see actually some of the same motifs you see in Little Red Riding Hood, particularly the prohibition and then the punishment after the prohibition. Because both of them are kind of dealing with the same themes, this punishment of female curiosity and sexuality, implicitly or explicitly, as you'll see in different versions. But apart from that, the plots of these tales seem very, very different because of the way the motifs are arranged and the kinds of characters that are used set up a different narrative. So, the ATU 312 isn't about a little girl, it's about a young woman who's getting married to a stranger. And this stranger she marries gives her one prohibition, one thing she's not allowed to do. Of course, she does this, and in doing so, she gains forbidden knowledge. And that's typically the knowledge that her husband has killed all of his previous wives because they, like her, violated his prohibition. And at just that moment, the husband comes back and he demands her life because of her failure to obey his rule. At the last moment, though, this wife calls for help, and in calling for help, she gets somebody to come. In Perrault's story, it's her brothers, and they rescue her, killing her husband for being a murderer, and she ends the story a happy widow with all of his gold and free to do whatever she wants. So that's how Perrault's tale goes, the first tale that you read. Now, this tale that Perrault wrote in the 1690s is extremely popular, particularly in the 19th century of Victorian Britain. And in Great Britain, it goes on to become a play. So, our history check for this part of our lesson is that during the 19th century, this play, Bluebeard, is really popular. It's like a Victorian Disney, because the pantomime was the financial backbone of Victorian theater. That means everybody went. They went every Christmas. They all watched it. And so you would see a lot of the same, if you're watching something every Christmas, you're going to get a lot of repetition, right? Now, they didn't watch Bluebeard every Christmas, but in Bluebeard, Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella, well, then you have to cycle back eventually to Bluebeard again. And in this pantomime, slightly different than the literary versions of the story, Bluebeard becomes a comic villain. And instead of being executed at the end of the story, he's actually sentenced to live with his resurrected wives, and forced to apologize, and the implication is they're going to make him sorry for the rest of his life for what he's done. And this comic twist on serial murder and spousal abuse, really heavy topics, I think is part of the very intricate history and the responses to this tale that we're going to be looking at. So, the first response we're going to be looking at is by Angela Carter. She grew up in Great Britain, and she would have grown up watching this extremely popular pantomime. It was just kind of like watching Disney. Everybody saw them. And seeing this comic treatment of intimate partner abuse and serial murder is part of, I think, the way she responds to this as such a complicated and dark tale. And then again, Nalo Hopkinson's would have seen this not perhaps as a British pantomime, but as a Jamaican pantomime, which, as when it moved to Jamaica in pantomime form, one of the things, although it continued to have comic violence, that violence didn't celebrate spousal abuse. Instead, it exposed colonial abuse in ways that we're going to look at later. And I think we see that more in Hopkins' response. So, thinking about this, thinking about the comic, you're going to be watching this video, and I want you to think about, what does comedy do? And then bring that into your responses to this later on in the section. So look forward to seeing what you read, watching this video. And this video, by the way, is by Dr. Peter McGraw. He worked for the School of Business at the University of Colorado. And this theory he has, the benign violation theory of humor, is part of his research into business ethics. Didn't know fairy tales and business ethics could go together, huh? So watch this and think about, how is comedy working? How is a benign violation part of the message of Bluebeard?